Kathy was stunned. It was not as if she had never seen a gigantic crater ever before, but it had only been in pictures. Although now that she stood right at the edge of a massive hole in the face of the earth, her eyes grew wide in shock. She tried to look beyond the darkness of the terrifying hole which opened into the earth beneath them, but the pale, lifeless sun above her head no longer gave away any light. The feeble light shining through the ashen sky did nothing to provide either light or warmth to the wasteland she was being forced to survive in. How long had it been? She had lost all track of time, unable to remember if she had been walking for weeks only, or if it had been months already. She walked a little further through the endless expanse of cracked earth, over jagged rocks, her boots crunching steadily against brittle ground. A lone tear escaped her eye while she sat down by the large crater, her body too exhausted to move any further. Now that so much time had passed, deserting almost all of the world entirely, she could not even remember what had actually happened. It had all started with a simple virus. Everyone had thought it was going to be a simple virus, like any other, and quarantine would fix everything. But people had dropped dead by the handful, making everyone unsure of what was wrong. She remembered it perfectly well because the government had put her in charge of the cure. As a scientist, Kathy had spent most of her life experimenting over viruses and drugs, and at 28, she was quite a well-known researcher already. But the situation had boggled her mind. The virus only kept multiplying, changing its shape within seconds. Kathy could not even understand its makeup, much less find a cure for it. And to make matters worse, people kept on dying. Everyone around her, everyone she loved and knew, began to die before her eyes until she had to seal herself inside her lab, simply trying to stay safe. But sooner or later, she had known she would need to get out. Only, she had not been ready to see the world suffering in this manner. The virus began to mutate, and people turned into an unnameable creature. That was when Kathy decided to run. Miraculously, the virus had disappeared now, only leaving strange creatures behind, which were on a mission to turn everyone like them. Everyone called them the undead. All Kathy knew was that she was trying to escape, but she just did not know how to. Her throat burned with thirst as she sat there, trying to remember the last time she had eaten. Everything around her was barren and lifeless, time losing all meaning in this desolate world. The wasteland spread out in every direction, a barren graveyard of what had once been a thriving civilization. For weeks now, her only companions had been the howling wind and the skeletal remains of trees all around her. She was simply glad of not having run into any undead in this part of the country, giving her some semblance of peace. Despite that, she had been unable to find shelter, and with no destination in mind, she simply did not know where to go. At times, she felt like a ghost who was wandering aimlessly through a world which had forgotten she even existed. That was when she saw it. As darkness grew around her, something in the distance glimmered sharply, like a flicker of light reflecting off something metallic. She squinted, sitting down on her knees while shielding her eyes from the biting wind. It was beginning to get colder, and she tightened her jacket around her body, wondering if she was hallucinating. She moved closer, and the flicker did not disappear, making her stand up. Carefully avoiding the depth of the crater stretching before her, she quickened her pace, her heart accelerating wildly. As she drew closer, her eyes found a rustic metallic board, which was half buried in the earth, the writing on it barely legible. It read, "The Alpha City. Jump to enter." Her breath caught in her throat as she realized what the crater was. She hesitated, remembering how, while she had been shut inside her lab, she had been hearing stories of people who were building underground bunkers to escape from the virus-infected world. The bunkers were as large as entire cities, built beneath the surface of the earth to escape the horrors which were above it. She had just never thought it was real, until today. The underground cities had been an excellent idea from what she had heard, but they came with their fair share of warnings. Many people had said that nothing good can ever survive underground, and all the governments who were spending large amounts of wealth and resources to build them were doing a stupid thing. But maybe, just maybe, Kathy would end up actually finding something underneath it. The sun had descended entirely, throwing the lone woman into deep darkness. As the temperature dropped even further, Kathy felt as if she did not have a lot of choice. She sighed deeply, moving even closer to the crater, which seemed like nothing but a bed of darkness and death. Despite that, she dangled her legs in the opening, trying to get a sense of how deep it might be. It was deeper than she could ever imagine. She sat there for several minutes, wondering if she was making the right decision. If this was nothing but a hoax, she would be falling down to her death, but it was a risk she was willing to take. Walking in this wasteland was exhausting her immeasurably, and with no food and water, she was bound to keep suffering. If she truly found the Alpha City underneath this, all her problems would come to an end. She knew she was ready. With a deep breath, she shut her mind entirely and jumped down into the darkness, a loud scream escaping her throat. She had only been falling for a few seconds before she landed on something soft and pillow-like, taking the brunt out of her fall. As she steadied herself, she fetched for her flashlight from the backpack, quickly shining the light all around her. She had landed straight onto a massive net, which must have been placed here for this exact purpose. Without wasting a single second, Kathy jumped down from the net, landing back on solid ground. As she flashed light on the cavernous walls around her, she could see pipes and wires, the clear indications of a proper city, and within seconds, she had walked inside a large gate, her eyes widening in shock and disbelief. It was indeed a city, or at least the remnants of a city that had once been. She looked up, staring at the dark sky above her as towering structures of steel and glass rose from the cavern floor, their surfaces appearing dulled and decayed due to neglect. She walked on the streets that stretched out before her, lined with vehicles that had clearly been abandoned and storefronts which had been left to crumble. The air was eerily silent, the only sound in the entire area being a faint hum of a machine which was echoing throughout the cavern-like place. With lights shining all around her, Kathy wondered if it was some kind of machinery which was somehow still powering the place. For her, it was not just a city, but a city frozen in time. Her footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness, making her feel as if she was the lone survivor in a world of nothing and no one. She had never felt so alone. Her blue eyes landed on a sight in front of her, which displayed "Welcome" written in bold. She walked closer to read further. Alpha City, the last refuge of humanity. But if this indeed was the last refuge of humanity, where was everyone? Why had this city been abandoned, just like the rest of the world as well? A part of Kathy knew that the reason behind such a thing was going to be something sinister, and she desperately wanted to find it out. But how? This fully fledged underground city, which was clearly built to withstand and escape from the apocalypse, was deserted before her eyes, and Kathy could tell something had gone wrong. She continued to explore, realizing that whatever had happened, had forced people to leave this city rather hastily. Everything was perfectly intact, but still empty. She walked inside the door of a diner to her left, noticing how the food was still on the plates of the tables, even though some were shattered. Bags lay open and napkins remained thrown on the ground, as if all the people had somehow vanished in a heartbeat. Her heart pounded even faster, the more she walked around this empty space, causing fear to grow in her chest. Had she done the right thing by coming here? She was suddenly very unsure of all of it. School buildings had textbooks laid open, and hospital beds were neatly made with medical supplies still on the tables beside them. She entered each building, noticing how everything looked like a smaller, neater version of the large cities built upwards, and how strange it was for her to see all of it. She noticed a large roundabout, which was definitely the central plaza of the city, her gaze falling on the massive holographic display, which glitched and flickered weakly. She stood there, her brows furrowed as she tried to make sense of the image of a man in a lab coat, which kept appearing and disappearing. His face was gaunt with hollow eyes, and Kathy could see a similar tiredness in his manner, which was now in hers as well. His voice crackled with static as he spoke in a robotic manner, appearing unhappy and serious. If you are witnessing this right now, you must know that Alpha City has fallen. The virus we had tried to escape from on the surface of the Earth found its way into our sanctuary. Underneath the Earth, with higher temperatures and the powerful energy of the core, it spread even faster, and we failed to contain it. But rather than simply killing everyone, it turned everyone infected into something else. The holograph paused, disappearing momentarily, before reappearing. The man spoke again. We don't know what to call it. Kathy's eyes widened. She knew they must definitely be the undead. She sighed, continuing to listen. We sealed the city to prevent this infection from reaching back to the surface, but I believe it is too late. We believe that those creatures have reached to the surface as well, and this virus is no longer just a disease that kills, but instead a disease that devours. If you have accidentally come here, you must find the elevator at the end of the city and leave. Do not stay here. Do not search for survivors. There are none. There is nothing left here for you. Run. Run before it is too late. Her blood ran cold at the clear warning in the doctor's voice, and she knew he was right. It was much easier to escape the undead on the surface, since it was much bigger with more places to run to and hide. But underneath the earth in a small cavernous city, it would be impossible to defeat them. This was where they had been created, and must certainly be the strongest. It was imperative that she left at once. She quickened her footsteps, trying to reach the end of the city to find the elevator the doctor had mentioned, when a faint sound forced her to freeze in place, her heart pounding wildly. The sound came again in a whisper, slightly louder this time. Please help me. Kathy turned around, trying to find the source of the sound. It was surreal for her to hear a human voice after so long, and then her eyes finally fell into the narrow alleyway right beside her. Just beside the wall, a tiny woman was sitting, her condition appearing pale and haggard. Without a single thought, Kathy ran towards her, overcome with shock and happiness. She could not believe she had found someone else. She was not alone. As Kathy approached and kneeled down beside her, the huddled woman finally looked up, looking just as shocked as Kathy. She spoke. You are real. I thought I was imagining you. I thought I was imagining you too, but clearly not, Kathy replied, a small smile playing on her lips. She did not remember the last time she had smiled. What is your name? Kathy asked the young woman, who barely looked 20. Lara. And yours? The woman replied with a question of her own. Kathy. Kathy answered at once. I thought I was the only one left and there was no one else, Lara whispered, her voice weak with exhaustion. What happened here? Kathy asked, curiosity getting the better of her. We were fine. We had escaped the virus and were beginning to rebuild our lives, the woman replied, a lone tear escaping from her eye and journeying down her pale cheek. She spoke again. But the virus returned, and this time it turned into a disease by changing people. It made them different, and the doctors sealed the city to stop it from escaping. Everyone I know died or left, but I was left here all alone. I have been hiding here for months, trying to look for food and water to survive. But I can't believe I am not alone. You are not. We are in this together, Kathy reassured her, her strength returning renewed, now that she knew she had someone beside her to survive with. Although Kathy's relief was short-lived. A sound echoed loudly through the cavernous walls, the familiar low and guttural growl of the undead. Kathy had not heard this sound in weeks now, but it immediately alerted her, reminding her of their presence. She could sense they were close, but she would not let terror get the best of her. She was not going to die here. They are here, Lara whispered, her expression filled with unkempt fear. We need to fight them and run towards the elevator at the end. That is our only hope. Lara nodded as the two of them stood up, both of them quickly fetching a weapon from their respective backpacks. Kathy held her machete tightly in her palm, while Lara gripped a dagger, both of them standing tall. Although they barely had the time to register much when those creatures emerged from the shadows, their twisted bodies clearly unhuman. The two women backed away as they watched the glowing eyes of the undead, burning red with hatred. Their movements were unpredictable and jerky, but Kathy did not let that stop her. She stepped forward, swinging her machete with as much precision as she could, and attacked some of them. To her surprise, Lara, who appeared rather timid, did just that as well, the two of them successfully escaping from the alleyway. Kathy grabbed Lara's hand as they ran at top speed, the creatures still behind them, although still a considerable distance away. Kathy was sure she could lose them, if only they ran fast enough and took twisted routes. They dodged through the labyrinthine streets, the growls growing louder and more frantic behind them. But they kept running without looking back. The only thing Kathy focused on was running forward, trying her best to reach the end of the city. They simply needed to get to the elevator, and Kathy would easily find an escape, especially now that she had Lara beside her. Escaping was even more important. She had finally found a companion in this lonely world. There is the elevator, Kathy shouted, her eyes falling on the glass elevator only a few meters away. Will that help us escape? Lara asked, making Kathy turn to look at her. Yes. Did you not hear the doctor in the holographic image? He said the elevator is our only chance at escape, Kathy shouted in reply, suddenly growing confused while she ran. If Lara had indeed been in the Alpha City for months, like she had said, she should have already known about the elevator. She should have already tried to escape, rather than staying here and fighting the undead every day. Suddenly, something in Kathy's gut told her that she had befriended the wrong person. It could not be right. None of it made sense. Kathy reached the elevator and quickly slammed the button, praying it still worked. The doors opened before her, but just as she was getting inside, Lara shapeshifted before her eyes, her proper human body turning into that of an undead. Kathy's eyes widened as Lara's now unhuman arm landed on her own, and she quickly swung her machete, cutting Lara's head from her body in one swift motion. She pushed away Lara's arm from her body and got inside the elevator, slamming the button to take her to the top while the rest of the undead caught up to her. Kathy's heart kept pounding as she noticed them tugging onto the elevator chain, but they could neither climb it nor push it down. Despite that, she had lost all comprehension, unable to grasp what had just happened. The elevator ascended slowly, its gears groaning in protest, but it held on. Her breath came in ragged grasps as she leaned against the wall, feeling weaker than she did before she had jumped into the crater. She had trusted someone, and that someone had been an undead. This meant that they could shapeshift as well, due to being this close to the core of the earth. She felt even more alone. The elevator finally reached the surface, and Kathy stepped out on the other side. To her surprise, she had landed somewhere entirely different. The sun was shining, and it was not bitingly cold, as it had been when she had jumped into the underground city. It felt as if she had reached a different side of the world. She stood up, looking at the trees spreading before her eyes, unable to believe how this place was still thriving. "Who are you?" someone asked from behind her, and she turned around, her machete raised high. It was a man. "Dr. Kathy Sanders. Who are you and what is this place?" she asked him instead, when her gaze landed on the doctor from the holograph she had seen in Alpha City. As the doctor walked closer, Kathy felt strangely calm. "You are the doctor in the holograph down in Alpha City. You are coming from the city?" the smiling doctor asked, his eyes no longer appearing hollow. "Yes." Kathy nodded, lowering her machete. The man before her lowered his dagger as well, while the doctor stood between the two of them, unarmed. "Well, it seems as if we have another survivor." The doctor chuckled, motioning for Kathy to walk beside him further ahead. And in those few seconds when Kathy knew that she was no longer alone in the world, she felt her hope returning again. As she followed the doctor into the light between the trees around them, she couldn't shake the feeling that the thriving world before her eyes was just another illusion. She knew the undead were still out there, and the virus was far from defeated. But for now, she had finally found a glimmer of hope, and that was enough.